But for now, let's take another question. And the next question is from Alistair Thompson. Mr Thompson.
What policy position of yours is beyond compromise?
Right. What policy position of yours is beyond compromise? The polls suggest that this general election could be heading for a dead heat. This party, the Scottish National Party, may hold the balance of power. It may be the Liberal Democrats, it may be the UKIP, it may indeed be the Greens. So who knows? It could be anyone who could have a role in this, in our new politics. I suppose is that the thrust of your point? Exactly. Right. So what policy position of yours is beyond compromise? Patrick Harvie.
Well, I could never support a government that was supporting the idea of replacing our weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. I would never support a government that was willing to repeat the disastrously failed neoliberal economic model, which has allowed wealth to be hoarded by those who need it the least, while those who are in greatest need are left stranded. But I think there's an interesting question about the kind of politics that could emerge out of this. I think this country has a genuine, honest-to-goodness, multi-party democracy that is struggling to find its way out from under the first-past-the-post system. First-past-the-post is great at choosing between two things. Choosing, as Jim says, between which guy's going to walk into number 10. I think we need a system which allows people that broader range of choices across the political spectrum and places an expectation on all political parties that they'll behave maturely and that they'll find areas of genuine common ground. Coalition doesn't need to be as dishonest as the current one at UK level is, where one party went round half the country in 2010 saying, vote for us, we're the only way to keep the Tories out, and the other half the country saying, vote for us, we're the only way to get rid of Gordon Brown, and the leader in the middle said, we've ruled nothing in and we've ruled nothing out. It doesn't have to be that way.
Harvie,
most European countries have a genuine multi-party democracy. I think this country deserves one too.
Can I just check something with you? So, are you effectively saying that the Green Party will not in any way prop up a government or support a government that is in favour of capitalism?
I think there genuinely needs to be a re-evaluation of the nature of economic
But is that
power.
a red line for you in this general election if the Green Party MPs might be called upon, who knows, to have a say? Are you basically saying you won't be involved in any government if capitalism is the model that they are proceeding with?
There is a fundamental problem with the nature of modern capitalism as it stands at the moment. Finance capitalism, where so much of our economy
your point about
is
that, but what's the
owned
answer to the
by
question about,
the finance industry.
I understand
we talked
that.
a moment ago.
What's the answer to your question, though, to my question about government and whether or not you would support a government? Because who knows, your MPs might be called upon to do so.
Is that word a red line? I'm not sure that would be meaningful. Look, in the last session of the Scottish Parliament, which was balanced, we found genuine areas of common ground to work together with a minority government, even though we have serious areas of differences as well. And I think that's the mature way to go about it. Okay. The phrase a moment ago was control over our own economy. Let's remember that so much control over our real economy, infrastructure, the railways, the energy industry has been handed over to a tiny number of vast multinationals.
Okay,
that's the kind of control that we need to get back so that our economy itself is democratically accountable.
Thank you very much. Willie, Rennie.
On cue, Europe again.
The question was, what policy position of yours is beyond compromise?
Yeah, what we've sought to do in the last 5 years is to get the economy back on track and do it fairly. Now, we think we've made progress on that. Now, what we need to do next is to continue that progress. So there's a range of policies that we've set out in terms of cutting the deficit, balancing the books and doing it fairly, investing in the NHS, £800 million, investing in school education from cradle right through to college, delivering more powers to the Scottish Parliament. Those are our top priorities.
No, but
along
the
with
question is not top priorities, the question is beyond compromise.
But what the issue is here is that it's up to the voters to decide the strength that they give each political party. You cannot demand beyond your strength.
Would you have said tuition fees was beyond compromise, for example?
James, you know I've said sorry for that, Nick Clegg said sorry for that, but what we need to do is to make sure that in the next Parliament we deliver that stable government for the future of the country, to stay on the course that we've pursued in the last 5 years.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I was asked for a single policy that's beyond compromise, and I'll tell you that absolutely straight. I will not compromise our commitment to the United Kingdom. We are the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
It's not a great surprise, I must say. Not a great surprise. I mean, what practical effect does that have?
Well, first of all, that means that we won't be doing any sorts of deals with the SNP, and to be fair to Nicola, she's ruled out doing any sort of deal with us, so people at home can be assured when they're looking down their ballot paper that we won't be letting the SNP by backdoor into government, because we don't believe that you want to do a coalition deal. You want to put at the heart of the UK government a party whose sole aim is to break up the UK. And what we've also said is that we will continue to fight, because yes, the referendum happened. We were told that we weren't going to be having another one for a political generation. That slightly got washed away last night.
Would you block
one?
Would you block one? The Prime Minister says this evening, we settled that on the question of a referendum. Would you prevent one being held again?
Well, I think this is really a question for Nicola, because she didn't ask it last night. Would she seek one?
It's not. It's a question for you. We'll come to questions. Ms Sturgeon will be asked plenty. This one's for you. Would you block... I mean, the point is that Westminster has, in a certain sense, or had last time, to acquiesce to allow the constitutional arrangements to be put in place. Would your party block that if this is a red line for you, as you say it is?
We did not block it.
No, will you?
I do not see an area where, if the circumstances arose again, that we would. However, we were promised, and we would feel the betrayal very deeply when we were promised time after time after time by Nicola, by Alex Salmond, by John Swinney, by all of her MSPs, all her MPs, all her MEPs, all her councillors, that this was, and I quote the SNP poster, their one opportunity. When we were told it was once in a generation, we were told by the end of the campaign it was once in a lifetime. If she's coming back next year in her manifesto with this, and that's the question she didn't answer last night, and I would like an answer to it this evening.
What policy position of yours has been compromised?
I'm not planning or proposing another referendum. A vote for the SNP in this election is not a vote for another referendum. It is a vote to make Scotland's voice heard much, much more loudly. Look,
everyone's
Willie,
asking about 2016. Everyone around me.
I haven't even started the process
of
drafting the 2016 manifesto. I've not published. I've not published.
It hasn't crossed your mind.
I've not.
Let
me answer the question. I've not published the 2015 manifesto yet, but something material would have to change in terms of the circumstances or public opinion before I think it would be appropriate to have a proposal for a referendum.
Like what?
Well, you know, I don't know. Perhaps if the Tories wanted to drag us out of the European Union against our will, for example, that might change the circumstances. But you know, let me also say why it would be completely outrageous for any one of us to stand in here on this platform tonight and rule out forever and a day the Scottish people getting the chance to choose. And the reason for that is it's not in the gift of politicians to do that. If we learned anything during the referendum campaign, surely it was that the future of this country, the decisions that determine the direction of this country, don't belong to politicians, they belong to the people of Scotland.
Willie, Rennie and then Jim Murphy. Briefly, Mr Rennie, briefly.
You're not thinking about breaking your promise, are you? Because I would advise against it.
I'm sure you would. I'm not. I think, unlike the Liberal Democrats, we'll keep keeping our promises.
Are you inclined towards it?
There's a basic. I do accept the result of the referendum, but there's a.
The European Union will keep on voting.
There is a triple lock.
We may yet come to that.
You know,
Mr Murphy,
before it's inserted in a manifesto, something has to change. Then people have to vote for the manifesto if it is in it, and then people have to vote for independence. Politicians don't dictate this. The people are in charge. That's the basic issue of democracy.
Nicola, you don't get a mandate from an opinion poll. You get a mandate in your manifesto. And you've gone from being the proud co-leader of the big Yes campaign to being the kind of head of the Maybe's Aye, Maybe's No campaign. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing that badge or slogan or placard. But look, folks, this election that we're having isn't a rerun of the referendum.
You make it
people who voted all sorts of different ways in last year's referendum will vote all sorts of different ways in this general
election. Do you remember
election.
the question?
Of course, one thing I won't compromise on. First of all, sir, I won't compromise on my determination that Labour wins a majority government. But on the policy, we will never compromise on the fact that people who do the right thing and go out to work should be treated properly. So we'll increase the minimum wage, we'll abolish the exploitative zero-hours contracts, we'll end the need for food banks. People who go to work should always be better off than they would otherwise be on benefit, and on that Labour won't compromise.
So there's three policies. Increase the minimum wage, 0 hours contracts you're going to crack down on, and you'll get rid of food banks?
Get rid of the need for food banks.
Get rid of the need for food banks. So they're the three you won't compromise on. Nicola Sturgeon kindly reminded me in my ear that she didn't answer the question. What is policy position of yours is beyond compromise?
We will not vote for further spending cuts in the next Parliament because they're harming the most vulnerable in our society. And secondly, we will never, ever, ever vote for the renewal of the Trident nuclear missile system, because at a time when we are talking about austerity and the impact of austerity, it would be completely and utterly immoral to be spending £100 billion putting new weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. That money should be invested in the future of our children.
You want to spend that money? Oh, well, Ruth Davidson, yeah, why not? You want to spend that money, don't you?
Can I ask a question? Because I just want this clarified. Because the wording of what Nicola said about Trident has changed over the last few weeks, I've noticed. And it used to be, we're against this, and now it's, we'll never vote for it. And there is a deal that's being worked out right now. We're seeing it half in public, half in private, between Ed Miliband and Nicola Sturgeon, about her inviting the Labour Party to let them put Ed Miliband in power. And saying that you won't vote for Trident is not the same as saying that if there's a vote in the House of Commons, your MPs will vote against it. Will your MPs vote against it?
Let me put it very simply. It's often asked of me, is Trident a red line? Well, here's my answer. You better believe Trident is a red line.
Rather than abstaining? Is that voting against it rather than abstaining, though?
We will vote against any vote in the House of Commons, the renewal of Trident. We won't vote for it, we will vote against it. There is no circumstances in which SNP MPs will support the renewal of Trident. Is that clear enough for you?
That's clear enough for me.
There's a more nuanced point, though, and I'll come to the audience in a sec, but there's a more nuanced point here, isn't there? Because the question is not necessarily whether you would vote against Trident, which you've made clear you would. The question is, if a Labour government depended on SNP votes to continue in power, and you lost that Trident vote from your perspective...
Sure hang on.
Let me finish the question, if you don't mind. The question, therefore, is, would you then bring down that Labour government?
I'm sure you're familiar with the terms of the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. You can beat minority governments in the House of Commons on policy issues, force them to change direction without necessarily bringing down the government.
Yeah, but if they lose a vote of confidence and there's no other government formed in 14 days, then it collapses.
If we could get support in the House of Commons, and I know there'll be a lot of Labour backbenchers who also don't want to see the renewal of Trident, then yes, we could force a different direction, and that would be a very, very good way of Scotland making its voice heard in the next Parliament.
The way to avoid this public horse trading like this is that, of course, we have an election. We have an election on the 7th of May. You can avoid public horse trading, of course you could. But you could have a lot more poverty and people in hardship, of course you could.
We can have a lot more people in work.
The fact is, 7th of May is the election. The media have decided the most important day in the 7th of May of election is the 8th of May. I think you should get the right to decide what happens rather than leaving it to the pundits to do the post-match analysis of an event that hasn't yet taken place. Okay. I'm confident that we can win this election. It's a two-horse race between Labour and the Tories. We're either going to have Ed Miliband or David Cameron as Prime Minister. Any seat the SNP win from Labour here in Scotland increases the chances of David Cameron being the leader of the biggest party. And the leader...
Thank you.
The leader of the biggest party has been in government since every election since 1924. We cannot take that risk. We cannot take that gamble.
Thank you.
We need to have that uncertainty and change.
There's someone on the panel we haven't heard from, and it's not fair to everybody if we don't. David Coburn.
Well, our red line obviously would be
Europe.
Doing it. Also, Nicola, with people like you, we would be totally against any party who wants to break up the United Kingdom.
That's a relief for me, let me tell you.
For 300 years, Nicola. It served us well for 300 years. They want an unstable currency, and they want to be part of a sclerotic Europe, which is collapsing, with Southern Europe in a financial collapse.
I can't tell you.
And they would also have to have the euro, which I don't think anybody here would want.
I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear that I'm irretrievably on the wrong side of David Coburn.
Well,
I'm delighted about that.
Good. Let's go to the audience. Thank you very much.
We're doing rather well.
Let's go to the lady right in the front in the blue jacket.
Just going back to the original question about what you
won't
compromise on. Nobody tonight, there's been a lot of talk about the NHS, there's been a lot of talk about welfare and vulnerable people, but nobody, I think, in any of the leaders' debates has focused on the need and the growing need for really good and well-resourced social care services in Scotland and indeed in the UK. And I'd love to see that being something that the politicians won't compromise on.
The woman in the green dress, or in green anyway, up there, yes.
I'm just wondering, Labour say that they won't compromise. If it came to it, if it comes down to it, will they actually join in with us? Will they join in a coalition with SNP?
OK, thank you very much. Well, Jim Murphy.
I wonder if I can just pick up on two of the points briefly, Jim, so
Yeah,
that's okay, because
sure.
I've already addressed one of them in part, which is that we want to beat David Cameron at the ballot box, not in a backroom deal. Like in the Grand National's coming up, and there are 40 horses in that race, and most people get a pin out and put a pin in the Daily Record or something to pick the horse. In this election, you put the pencil in your hand and hover over your ballot paper, and it's either a Labour government or a Tory government. We're determined to get rid of David Cameron and his Tories that way rather than through a deal. But the lady here asked about care in the health services. One of the things I think that politicians of all parties should focus more on, and that's the pressure of mental health in our country.
This is an issue devolved to Holyrood, doesn't it? Oh, it doesn't
really
figure in this general election,
picking up on
does
the
it?
points, well, it is how you fund it. Look, 1 in 4 Scots experience mental health problems at some point during their lives. We all probably know someone who has been affected, and we need to direct resources, I think, to care for those with mental health. And we should care as much about those who have got a broken or wounded spirit as we do those with a broken bone or broken body in that sense. And I think ending the stigma, investing more, and having that sense of respect for those people with mental health difficulties and challenges, particularly in the workplace, is something we don't talk about often enough in our country.
Patrick Harvie.
Well, I would agree with that, and I think all political parties, as we look to the 2016 election in Scotland, need to be taking the issue of social care as well as the NHS very seriously, but also how it connects to the welfare system, much of which is reserved at the moment and is the subject for this year's election, much of which is also dependent on how we fund all of our public services and the prospect that a future UK government will carry on cutting Scotland's block grant, carry on cutting Scotland's funding for public services, and carry on driving the kind of economic policies which leave so many people stranded and in ever greater need of care in the future. If we don't get this joined up, if we don't recognise that Scotland's not going to be able to invest in those services if we carry on with an austerity agenda from the UK, and if we carry on with a welfare system which has been subverted away from its original purpose. Its original purpose was supposed to embody the idea that as a society we care for one another, we look after one another from cradle to grave. It's now a system that's bullying people into low-paid work and subsidising that low-paid work so that employers don't need to pay what folk need to live with a bit of dignity. So a £10 minimum wage should be a priority for the next UK government.
Thank you. Now, the question originally was what policy position of yours is beyond compromise, and I feel I've been saying to Mr Coburn all along that we would come to his issue of the EU,
Yes.
And you did say that was your key issue.
Well, it's not the only one. It's sure, but break up of the United Kingdom.
If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
I'd like to talk about it. The problem is that all these people who sit in all these various parliaments are obtaining money by deception, quite frankly, because they're not actually earning their money properly. 70% of all decisions are made in the European Parliament. And quite frankly, I probably have more effect on them than they do. But the trouble is, as an MEP, you can only say yea or nay. All the legislation starts with the Commission, who are unelected. Now, that means that we are being run by an unelected group in Europe. That is simply not on. I want to see all our powers, all the powers of the European Union, brought back to Holyrood and Westminster, and we should be making those decisions, not European Union. Also, a lot of the poverty that you've been talking about, the 0 hours contract, all that sort of stuff, has been created in reaction to them getting rid of our temping.
That is rubbish.
And wait a minute, you've got a big say here, Jim.
Rubbish.
Let somebody else have a say. And I'll tell you something very important. It's also caused by open-door immigration policy. This is something Jim will never discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Depressing wages. This is depressing wages. And that's one of the reasons why you have food banks. It's depressing wages. Right. He will never admit it because they are the party who allowed this.
There we have it, folks. The immigrants are to blame for everything.
No, they're not.
The immigrants are to blame for everything.
It's the government who left an open-door immigration policy. If I were in Eastern Europe, I'd be coming to the UK too.
Stop demonising people who
Nicola
come to this country and made our country richer and made our country more diverse.
Nicola Sturgeon, ladies and gentlemen, we are very short.
Other countries.
Thank you.
Family came to this
Mr.
country
Murphy.
as immigrants.
Hello.
Don't demonise
Mr. Murphy, thank you
who came
both.
to this country.
Right, okay, come on, people, thank you. That's enough. Nicola Sturgeon.
I think the only depressing thing tonight is the narrow-minded, xenophobic attitude of David Coburn and his UKIP allies. It is absolutely, utterly disgusting. This is the guy who compared one of my colleagues to a convicted terrorist simply because he's a Muslim. You are a disgrace.
Thank you. Ruth Davidson, you have got 10, and I mean 10 seconds.
Yeah, and I support and supported both Humza Yousaf and Nicola Sturgeon in our stance against his bigotry. But one thing I think we can do is I think we can get a better deal out of Europe. I think we can renegotiate, and then I think we ask people what they think. Because the last time we were asked about Europe was 40 years ago. If you're 57 and a half, 58 years old, if you're younger than that, you've never been asked. And unlike Nicola, I believe that referendums about whether to be in or out of a union should come round every generation.
Well, time's up. I'm sorry, lots of people want to come in on the panel, but there's 6 of you and we've run out of time. Thank you very, very much indeed to our panel here, to our audience, thank you, and to you at home for watching as well. There is far more general election information and coverage available on our website, bbc.co.uk/Scotland News. But for now, from us here at the University of Aberdeen, a very good night.